If you were to give one bit of advice for someone looking to start doing this on their own, not necessarily making content, but just saying, I want to look at these rookies coming in and figure out if they're good. How should they even start this process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I really appreciate the way that you summarized what we're doing at the Rookie Big Board. I think you nailed it perfectly, right? One thing that's so important for me is to break down some of the gatekeeping that comes along with scouting. Certainly there are NFL scouts and NFL evaluators that need to speak a different language, but for fantasy football, it's been really important for me. I am scouting for fantasy production, right? I guess I have two suggestions for folks who just want to get into it, right? Maybe you're always listening to these types of episodes in the off season. You want to see it for yourself rather than just trusting. I think that's awesome. Go to YouTube. First off, just go to YouTube and type in, you want to watch a prospect from, the Alabama offense. Just type in Alabama offense 2025. You're going to get some broadcast film. Now, do I like all 22 film? Absolutely. Do I learn more when I'm watching all 22 film? Yes. But if you're just getting into it, don't get so focused in, how do I get all 22? How do I get this source? Just throw on some film and watch it. And then the thing I would say on top of that is, a great read. So Physical Book, Take Your Eye Off the Ball by Pat Kerwin. I think that really helps kind of put you in the mentality for how to approach scouting. Don't feel like you have to have this perfect scouting process right away. It took me several years to develop my system before I even felt comfortable putting any content out there. And I certainly refine it each and every year. So I think those are two really easy ways. One, to get you into the mentality, and two, to just get yourself doing it.
Man, so I'm one that I obviously, like you, I prefer all 22, but especially when you're getting started, like it doesn't make sense to give yourself these unnecessary hurdles, right? It's kind of like working out where you say like, well, I can't go work out because I don't have a trainer or I don't have a state-of-the-art gym. It's like, no, you can go outside, just go run, right?
Yeah.
The same thing here. Like you can go as scout players. You don't need all 22. It certainly helps and the results will be better. But like, I know what I had to do in college when I was working at FIU. You just get crappy game film that's cut up by the coach or the player with some music bed over it and crazy effects. And it's just a horrible highlight film. And you just have to be like, I think this guy's pretty good, right? Like you have to get used to that. And I love that you mentioned that, man. Cause like I've talked about this before of like, you can be a purist and say what you just said, right? Just like find all 22, but you can still do it with the other stuff. And that's very necessary. Yeah. I love the book rec, by the way. Take Your Eye Off the Ball. That's one that I have heard of for years and years and years. I've never actually read it. I read War Room. Have you read that one yet?
I have not read that one. No. I'll add that one to my list.
That is, I want to say there's two that I've read. There's one from GM Ernie Accorsi, who put together the Giants with Eli Manning and all that. And there's another one, or maybe it's the same book and I'm getting them together, is about Bill Belichick. And like how he created, like he systemized everything for the Patriots. And maybe it's a terrible book to read because he missed a lot of draft picks, but there were some that like always fit, right? Like this is why we get the Julian Edelmans and stuff like that.
As long as it's not his analysis for building a college roster at UNC.
Yeah, no, not great. Not great. Or managers. Hey, Matt, Rookie Big Board, we talked about that a little bit, man. How do you, maybe it's a personal thing, maybe it's something you develop specifically for Big Board, but how do you come up with a system for those evals? Because like I know when I've done it in the past, sometimes it's as simple as, hey, we've got like 5 criteria a player needs to hit. We have 30 criteria that apply at certain thresholds, and we're going to grade it on numbers or different things, right? Like what is it for you? You don't have to share any proprietary secrets, but like what's kind of the thought process when creating something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my process is film informed, right? It's film forward. I have 20 different traits that I evaluate every prospect on. Those traits are different based on the position they play. And so, what I've really developed out my weighted formula per trait, it's based on, what I have found translates again to fantasy football success. That's really the process that I've put into it. Now, the film in the tape grade, as I would call it, right? All those scores add up to a tape grade. That's only a portion of my process. I'll also balance that out with draft capital. And
Mhm.
I think we'll get into a draft capital conversation here today because that's a big piece of the process here. So that's another piece of the formula. The last piece is both short and long-term projection for actual fantasy football production. And I know this part sounds really simple to folks, but I do think it's a piece that gets missed in a lot of processes. Like it's actually really important for me. I have a full projection spreadsheet every NFL player, right? And I put those rookies into it the day after they're drafted in April, and that goes into their rookie big board rating, which is that ultimate number that I have for them. It's a 1 to 10 scale, right? And my tiers are kind of broken out. They're not kind of. My tiers are broken out based on the level of impact a player will have on your roster. Are they top three quarterback in the league? Are they a top six quarterback? So everything in my process is really informed by what's that actual output on the back end. And so whether I like a player's tape, that is very important. That's the foundation of the process. But there's more factors that go into it than just that.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, and I love that because like everything with this is going to be nuanced, right? Like there are so many different factors that go into it. It's never as black and white as people want to make it. Is the guy good or is the guy bad, right?
Right.
There's so much more to it. But what I love there is you mentioned talking about production and how it relates to fantasy and dynasty and like what that could be in the long-term outlook versus short-term. How has scouting players helped you with fantasy and dynasty football? Is that something that you've been able to successfully separate from this guy's a good NFL player versus he might not be great for the NFL, but he can be good for fantasy or vice versa? Like most of the time it's the other way around, right? Like he's good for the NFL, but not great for fantasy.
Yeah, I think it has made a world of difference, right? And I think the biggest thing it comes down to for me is I've developed an appreciation for how a player can get to production, right? I think there's an approach to this game where there's good players and there's bad players, right? You want to draft the good players. That's not where I've landed on this process, right? I think I've developed an understanding of how different skill sets can contribute differently to NFL offenses based on the opportunity they're given, based on the scheme they're put in, right? Not every wide receiver is going to contribute right away in every offense. Um, and then being able to understand, you know, this player, they're going to make an immediate impact. You feel confident with that. They're a first round rookie pick. Maybe you don't see an immediate path to production for this player, but you trust their skill set. And, say you really like a running back in the third round, right? Like I really liked Woody Marks last year, right?
Hmm.
I had him as a third round rookie pick. He didn't have an immediate path to production, but there was an understanding that if one player or two players go down ahead of him, then he's the next man up and then he's got the volume, right? And we found ourselves in that situation. So that was a nice hit for me. So I think moving away from this idea of good players versus bad players. Now, that being said, some guys I watch and I think they're a bad player, right? And they're not going to have
Right.
any translation. But it's for me really developed an appreciation for different levels of impact. And you need all of those guys, right? Like you need to hit with your fourth round draft picks in your rookie drafts because like, remember how desperate you feel in week 11 of the season when the buys and the injuries are piling up and you just need somebody in there to get 5 points in your flex spot. And that could be the difference between making the playoffs or missing them.
Yeah, man, I love that you bring that up because I was feeling that this year. There's times where I was saying, "Oh, thank God I hit on this third or fourth round pick," because like my bench actually had depth. Like it wasn't just a bench filled with
Yes.
maybe next year. It's a sort of like a false sense of security with all these players on your bench there.
Yeah, depth is
Uh,
absolutely critical. I mean, if you don't have that depth, it's really, really tough in today's NFL to make that championship run.
so Matt, you sit down, you start to look at a prospect, and I know it's going to be different for every single position, every single player. But what's one of the first things that comes to mind when you sit down and you start to evaluate a prospect?
Yeah. And so kind of going off of that theme, right? I try to really get 1.5 games of film in at least before I start getting too excited or too locked into a take on a player, right? Because you want to give them the chance to show their unique skill set. But, naturally there's going to be some things that just pop out as a priority for me. So when I'm looking at quarterbacks, I really want to see accuracy. That's something I really struggle to see improve at the NFL level if it's not done at the college level. And so in particular, I'm looking at a quarterback's ability to anticipate, right? So throw the ball to where the receiver will be, right? Not where the receiver is. That's a major red flag for me when a quarterback is just throwing the ball to the receiver at the very end of their route. The other thing that you, of course, always want to see from a quarterback, right, is athleticism. It's not the end all be all, right? But you could have a great passing quarterback that is just limited for their fantasy upside if they don't have any rushing ability. So that's a really important thing to see. If I'm looking at the running back position, for me, it's vision. And this is a hard non-negotiable for me. If I don't see a running back who understands blocking angles, who is decisive, I think that decisiveness is really important for me. You know, when they see an open gap, they have to be able to hit it. No dancing behind the line of scrimmage, because the game's only getting quicker in the NFL. The gaps are only getting tighter in the NFL. And you might land behind a great offensive line, but chances are you're going to get behind a worse offensive line, right? You know, especially if you are a highly productive running back at the college level. Wide receiver for me, it's separation ability. If you can't separate at the college level, the physicality of defensive backs at the NFL level is just so much higher, right? Even if you're playing in the SEC, even if you're playing in the Big Ten, that physicality is just so important, right? And then tight end, you know, you want to see those hands, but you really want to see alignment versatility at the college level too, right? Because a tight end who's staying in line for us, it's not that useful for fantasy purposes. So, you know, even if they're a guy who gets drafted day 3, if they're a guy that gets lined up in wide receiver sets a decent amount, that's going to be valuable. So, you know, kind of a quick overview there of some of the first things I'm looking for by position.
That's great. And that sort of answers a question that I had in the future, which is perfect. It like kind of brings it all together. You and I are very, very similar in a lot of these. Like tight end versatility is one of the things I'm absolutely looking for. The wide receiver, man, like I'm a big proponent of if they can't run a route or if they're not great at running routes, they're not going to learn how to do it in the NFL.
Right.
The coaches are not going to take the time to teach them, and you can't really separate if you're not a great route runner. You're going to end up being a one-trick pony. The running back thing, I'm like slightly adjacent on that, on the vision, because vision to me is obviously it's extremely important. I feel like I've seen running backs who I'm just like, man, they can't see anything and they still keep getting touches. Like I think I've seen a lot of DeAndre Swift who will like run into his lineman's back. I'm like, man, dude keeps getting touches. So I kind of swerved on that and made it more of like lane creativity. Like, can you create something when there is nothing? And that's also bit me in the ass before too. Like I get too excited about the Ken Walkers because I'm like, man, they're going to be -3 yards or 30 yards every single time.
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece of the puzzle, though, right? Because, you know, I'll use Dameon Pierce, for example. Like, I was a full fade on Dameon Pierce. I didn't feel like he saw the field well. I didn't think he had good anticipation for cutback lanes. But he landed in a Houston offense where he was 200 touches as a rookie. And I you know, we talk about changing the process. I think I overfaded him in those initial years. Now, it worked out for me in the end, right? Because as soon as that volume went away, his value went away. But at the end of the day, you know, if you get 200 carries on the ground, you can average 3.5 yards and you're still fantasy productive, right? At least at a flex level.
Yeah. So what about the other way? I know the things that you do look for, that like the positives, the thresholds, so to speak. What are the red flags for you? So, and you don't have to go like all throughout all the positions, but I mean, if you want to, you can. But like, what are the red flags you see that, and it just gives you the ick when you're watching someone's film?
Yeah, I think for me, you know, the biggest challenge for me for a quarterback, you know, well, sorry, I don't know how to answer that. I feel like I don't know how to answer that question without repeating myself.
No, you're fine. Repeat yourself. You know, do it. Okay. I love it, man. Like, just go for it. Repeat yourself, because I think it can drive the point home here, right? Like, there's going to be red flags with quarterbacks that we're going to see where, like, I know now, for me at least, as a Miami Dolphins fan, I've been a little more jaded where I'm going to say, okay, if a quarterback doesn't have the physical traits, a lot of things have to go right for this guy. Like it has to be the right system. It has to be everything's on timing. But then once the defense figures it out, brother, you got to be able to do something else, right? So like, is there just like red flags that pop up for you that you're just like, ugh, this always bothers me about any player?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're looking at the quarterback position, you know, I think judgment, right? Decision making under pressure. Okay. I think that's something that's going to be really important for me because, we talk about a lot. The NFL is not a developmental league, right?
It's
And
not.
so with quarterbacks, we want the game to feel slow. And there's always an acclimation period, right? The first, 1 or 2 months of the season. And sometimes that's why we don't see quarterbacks as early as we thought we would, right? The coaching staff wants the game to feel slow for them. And that comes down to decision making. If you put the ball in harm's way, you're not going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL for too long. And it's really hard to be fantasy productive if you don't have a good touchdown to interception ratio. So I think starting at the quarterback position, that's probably the first thing that jumps out.
Yeah.
And
Oh, go.
no, I was just going to say, so for the running back position, I think, again, thinking specifically in the context of fantasy, you want that pass catching ability, right? And it's not just the ability to catch the ball in the flat. That's great, right? Because that can get you 25, 30 targets. Again, I'm always thinking in terms of how does this player fit into a projection sheet. But for a running back catching the ball, you would love to see their ability to catch the ball in stride, or even better, catch and turn ability, right? Being able to actually, bring the ball in traffic, oftentimes, right? That's how a running back's catching the ball with defenders close to them, turn, make a guy miss after the catch. That's where the real impact pass catchers are going to be coming through here. For wide receivers, one lesson I've really learned, and this is going to build off of the separation point, but you go back and I remember when Rashad Bateman was coming out. What was that? 2021 now, 2022. I got a real reputation for being a hater on Rashad Bateman, to the point where Rashad Bateman quote tweeted me. So I was really in it there for a moment, because I was so caught on him in the fact that he consistently separated so late in the catch point, right? He over relied on his vertical athleticism, and he over relied on his ability to win late. And that worked at the college level, right? Like that worked at Minnesota. And we've seen in Baltimore, it doesn't work, right? Even if they're not as tall. And the other thing to take in mind is Rashad Bateman's what, 6'1 and a half, 6'2. Those guys are big receivers at the college level. You need to be 6'4 to get away with that in the NFL. So maybe you can, right? But the guy this year is Elijah Surratt. I see a lot of Elijah Surratt and Rashad Bateman. He's very popular. It's a great story. But if you watch him, he's an excellent contested catch guy. The highlight reels are so fun.
It's back shoulders for days.
Yeah, why is he a highlight reel? Because he's waiting until the last minute, right? So that for me is where I really get caught up on wide receivers. And, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but for tight ends, where I get caught is blocking ability, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you need to get on the field. You need to be valuable as a blocker for the most part, right? You have your Trey McBrides, and, there's exceptions to every rule, right? And I did like Trey McBride. But I mean, look at Aronde Gadsden this year, right? And he had an awesome season, and he returned value. He was like a 5th round draft pick, or not drafted at all from rookie drafts. But his volume will always be limited because he's only going to be on the field in so many sets, right? And if you're not on the field, you can't catch the ball. And if you can't catch, if you don't get volume, you're not producing, right? So you do want to see somebody who can be on the field all 3 downs. That was part of the reason I think Sam Laporta made such a quick impact in his rookie year. He was an excellent pass catcher, but he can put his hand in the dirt as well.
Yeah, no matter what, you want to find guys that are going to get themselves on the field. Because it's also, because I hear the argument all the time. It's like, well, if they're going to be on the field for a blocking play, it doesn't really help me or affect me for fantasy anyways. No, it's not going to in that moment. But there's also so many intangible things that we don't see and that we don't get to experience, like being in practice, where a coach will say, this guy doesn't block well. He doesn't give me the best reps in practice or in the games. We also need to disguise our looks, and we need to get other players out there on the field. Like that was a big story, not necessarily tight end, but for Jamison Williams, where it was no block, no rock for a while. And then all of a sudden it just became an effort thing. He was out there blocking, running 20 yards downfield, setting up blocks for his running backs, man. And it became a very different story for him. So I love that you bring that up. I've heard you talk about players where you're like, I was the guy that was pro this player or anti this player, and maybe strong wording there for that, but like more so of like, the quote hater, right? Like there's things from their games you don't like, but we're going to find that happen all the time. Like when you're analyzing stuff, all of this is so subjective and we try to make it objective. You're going to find that you're going to have a belief in scouting or in analyzing prospects that people in the space or others that just do this for fun will disagree with? Do you find that you have one of those things that you hold on to that you're like, man, am I taking crazy pills? Like, why am I the only one that thinks this?
Yeah, every year. Every year. And I think one of the hardest parts about being an evaluator and focusing on rookie content is trusting your evaluation, right? It's really important for me. Certainly I'm out there, I'm hearing other people's perspectives. I'm open to that, right? I'm not saying that I'm isolated in a bubble, but you do have to stick to your evaluations. You don't want to get stuck on groupthink. Groupthink, consensus out there, I think it's actually really valuable for me because it creates like a narrative and it creates a certain value range. And I find, oftentimes in my evaluation and with the rookie big board, what we're trying to do is manipulate that consensus value, right? And so I don't mind. I've learned over the years, I don't mind being against kind of a common narrative. And so a really great example, right, is Caleb Johnson last year. I was consistently below consensus on Caleb Johnson. And, one of the things that I had pointed out was, I think he needs to be in the perfect system. He needs to be in a perfect volume-based opportunity like we talked about earlier, right, with Dameon Pierce, in order for him to be immediately successful at the NFL level, just because I didn't feel like he felt space well. I didn't see his cutback ability. He didn't create any of his own space. He had a great Iowa offensive line doing some of that work for him. And I mean, I got a ton of pushback on it. And, I would say it's not even like just out there in Twitter, right? So we have a Discord for the rookie big board patrons. And, I would get a question about Caleb Johnson each and every week. And, it can be kind of tough, right? When your patrons are consistently like, dude, what's going on? Why are you so against, that kind of consensus take? But, it ended up being a really good spot because you were drafting either RJ Harvey or Caleb Johnson late first round, right? I was a big fan of RJ Harvey. That was a little bit above consensus, and that's really worked out well. And so I have found consistently, trusting your evaluation. And at the end of the day, for me, you're not going to hit 100%, right? You're never going to hit 100%. No. So my question I always go back to is, what was the process? Was the process correct? Did you look at the player the right way? Did you put him in the projection sheet the right way? If not, no, what are the lessons you can learn? Or if yes, you're validated at the end of that process.
I love that, man, because what you pointed out is it's not that you stick your head in the ground and you just, because I've heard people say, I don't listen to others. I don't care what they think. It's about me. And it's like, no, that's not necessarily it. It's good to hear from other people and to learn from other people and to acknowledge that those evaluations exist. But what you said and what I love is that you just need to stick to yours if you believe in it strongly. That doesn't mean you don't open yourself up to other information, right? Like, so I love the way you put that. Funny, specific situation like an RJ Harvey and a Caleb Johnson. In this, they end up getting drafted to teams where there's, it might seem like there's a lot of opportunity or the draft capital is higher. I think a lot of people expected RJ Harvey to go a little bit later than he did. And then when he got drafted higher, his dynasty stock went up. When Caleb Johnson got drafted later, it was third round, right? Like that went down. But then people are like, it's the Steelers. And then all of a sudden, Jalen Warren gets a contract extension. You're like, he's never going to play. And then you kind of just go back and forth. How much does draft capital or team situation for the landing spot, how much does that change your evaluation after the fact? Because you're still going to have your opinion, right? Like that's not going to change in the player, but whatever their value is going forward for fantasy and dynasty, how does that change for you?
Yeah, one of my mantras for the rookie big board is draft capital is an important thing. It's not the only thing, right? Yep. I think one thing that's unique to my process, at least, is the way that I interpret draft capital, though. So I don't look at it round by round. I've kind of built out my buckets and assigning different value percentages based on the different ranges of the NFL draft that I believe reflect the value that an NFL team has invested in that player, right? And the reason I do it like this is because if a NFL team invests X amount of value into a player, they're more likely to put them on the field. They're more likely to scheme them into opportunity or give them early reps, right? So my draft capital buckets are top 10 pick, 11 through 20. And that for me, that's the two first round ranges because, we talk about first round NFL draft talent in any NFL draft. you end up somewhere between 14 and 20 players that NFL teams view as a first round talent. They don't view 32 players as first round talents every year, right? So 21 to 50 for me is the next draft capital range. So I don't care if you're pick 22 or you're pick 50, you get the same amount of draft capital. It's still a priority for that team. They've invested early draft capital, but you're not this top 10 lock type guy. Past that, it's anybody on day two. So I don't care if you're 51 or 102. So RJ Harvey and Caleb Johnson actually would have had the exact same draft capital value for me last year, despite the fact you mentioned, RJ Harvey was late round 2, Caleb Johnson early round 3. And then I separate day 3 into 2 different categories, right? Rounds 4 and 5, and then 6 and 7. And then, I am a sicko. I do go deep. There's over 100 players on my rookie board every year. So I do also consider priority free agents and kind of differentiate some draft capital based on how quickly they're signed. It's a bit of a long-winded explanation, but I think it is important to recognize, draft capital for me isn't just round 1, 2, 3. It's much more nuanced than that. And again, right, what's the output? The output is, how confident am I projecting them for volume in their rookie season?
First of all, you're disgusting for just going all the way to undrafted players, but I guess, we do need to do that. Dude, I think it's so interesting once a player gets drafted, because I think a lot of times we will let our biases take over at that point too. Where if there's a guy that maybe we already liked and they go late first round, where it's like, I told you so, right? And it'll blind you to like what is actually going on there. So I love the way you kind of drop everybody into those buckets like that. I think that does a great job of setting up value in a sort of, let's call it, objective and analytical way. There's other ways that people do that, and that's typically going through data, and that is going to be getting the numbers. There has been this weird thing over the years where it's been film versus analytics. It makes no goddamn sense, but okay. To me, I always make the idea that it's like one is the recipe and the other one is actually cooking the food. Like, this is part of the same meal. Like, you need to have both to understand it. What's the relationship like for you? How do you balance film study with analytics? Do you watch one or take a look at one first and go to the other one? Do you cross check? And no judgments either. Do you just say like, I don't really need to look at that stuff because I know what I'm seeing when I watch film?
Yeah, I think it's really important to use the analytics to help fill in the context of a player, right? And so for me, that's really important in my process. And, that's like talking big picture, for a moment about the process too. I'm watching these guys from the time, and I'm tracking their stats and their production from the time they're freshmen in college, right? Like, the rookie big board has Devy rankings, dynasty rankings, and rookie rankings, right? And so I say that to lead into this conversation of, you want as much information as possible on a player, right? You want to build out this full portfolio. And so I will watch a player first because I don't want the stats to lead me in the way that I think about a prospect. I want to come in with somewhat of a clean slate. Again, I've been watching these guys for 3 years at least, right? So it's not a fully clean slate, but I want to go in with a fresh mind. But I will, after I watch a player, go in and look at the stats. And, in particular, right, there's a few that jump out to me a little bit more than others, right? So, when I'm watching tape on a wide receiver, right, I'm watching 3, 4, 5 games. If they're a smaller school guy, like Georgia State, I'm watching Ted Hurst. I can get 2 games of Georgia State tape. All right, I'm digging it up. So maybe you don't have as much games. You could watch that and say, wow, he's got some really nice hands. I like the way that he's able to go up and adjust to the ball. But then you might go into, their stat profile and see that they have a 9% drop rate. And you're like, wow, actually, I don't like their hands. And by the way, I use Ted Hurst as an example. His drop rate's fine, but that's you don't always see everything through tape.
You know what? I'm glad you said this, and I try not to do this whole like, let's break down a player thing, but I have started with one player eval this offseason. I'm about to hop into a whole bunch of them. I started with Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end from Oregon. And I had watched 2 games and my notes started to say, love the hands. Love the hands. They're always up. They're high pointing. They're consistent. And then I go and I look at the drop percentages on in his analytics, and I'm like, what the hell am I missing? So I go, okay, I got to start to watch some more film on the kid. Like, what's not adding up, right? And then there's times where I'll say like, okay, he's being set up for a screen and he's getting absolutely blasted by a defensive back. That's a drop. Like that's going to be counted differently. And then same thing. Like I was saying, man, I really don't see a guy that's breaking tackles in the open field against defensive backs. So the yak, probably not all the yards after catch, probably not all that great. And I go and look, analytics say otherwise. And I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Right. So like you sort of want to meet somewhere in the middle. And I think sometimes, at least for me, when I see numbers like that, I say, okay, let me watch more film, because now that film is going to give me the real answer. If I get 5 games deep on a player and I'm like, I'm still seeing the same thing, I have the context now, right, as to like why a certain number says a certain thing.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the right process to go into, right? And you can kind of extrapolate that to quarterbacks. I love turnover worthy play rate, right? You can't get into the mind of a quarterback, right? You can try to think you see them working through and have an understanding of how they work through progressions and make decisions, but there are some stats that are levelers, right? And they give you an idea. So I think that's a perfect way to look at it. I consider myself, better at analyzing film. I don't have a formula, a data model, but I certainly appreciate those that do. And I know I've had many folks who subscribe to the Rookie Big Board say, I love using you, overlaying you against insert my favorite data informed analysts, and I look for the players that check both your boxes, and those are the guys I draft.
That's great. That's great. And just to be a part of someone else's process is always great. When you're
Yeah.
doing all this work, man, like of course it's got to be there. Um, is there ever a time where maybe you see a metric prior to turning on the film and you say, "Oh, this is going to be good. Like this is something that has consistently steered me in the right direction."
Sometimes I'll look at passing charts for a quarterback, right? Just like over the course of the college football season. Because, I'm also playing in college fantasy football leagues. I'm also playing in campus to Canton league. So I am, all in. I'm playing really all levels of the game. And, I love when I can see accuracy in the midfield and the deep field, right? So in that 10 to 20 intermediate range, and then, 20, 25 yards plus downfield. When I'm seeing accuracy in that range, that to me is really encouraging. It gets me excited to watch a quarterback. And, it might sound counterintuitive. It can be exciting to watch quarterbacks, but it can also be a bit of a drag, man. Like their film takes longer. It's more nuanced. It's harder. Quarterback, I think, is the hardest position to evaluate correctly. And so if you can get, if you can lay out the passing chart and feel good about their ability to hit that middle of the field in the intermediate and deep, it's encouraging. It gives you some hope leading into it.
You know what I've done too with quarterbacks is, because I agree it's the hardest to evaluate. It is the position that I think has the smallest room for error and the shortest leash, typically. And so I start to ask myself, okay, well, what kind of player creates a longer leash with a coach? What type of player extends a play? What type of player can expand that room for error? And it usually ends up being those toolsy traits guys, the ones that can, run around the pot. I mean, not that Caleb Williams really needed any type of leash. He's the number 1 overall pick, but those guys that can extend the plays and keep things going tend to be the guys like that I will lean a bit more towards. And that's just something that's kind of like how my process has evolved, because I used to love those pocket quarterbacks that could just hit a bucket from 50 yards away. It was all about the accuracy and the timing. And I've seen myself sort of evolve in analysis over the years. Have you seen yourself do that? Like with the way draft classes change or the NFL changes, what's been some of the biggest changes you've had in the way you evaluate prospects?
Yeah, I think you have to evolve, right? But so I want to build off that point, because I think you have a really good point there in athletic quarterbacks, right? But for me, where I've really landed on it, I call it the Dak Prescott threshold, right? I don't need them to be Kyler Murray. I don't need them to be Lamar Jackson. But if you can get me 6 rushing touchdowns over the course of a season, if you can get me 200 yards, That's the difference, right, between being, quarterback 19 and quarterback 10. And so the prospect for me in last year's class that kind of fit that model was actually Tyler Shuck. And, you want to go
Let's
back to,
go.
yeah, you want to go back to
I,
unpopular opinions. That was an unpopular opinion, man. And I looked even worse through the first 9 weeks
I
of the
was right
season.
there with you, brother. I was right there with you. Shuck Hive, stand up. There are
Yes.
dozens of us.
There were
Let's
dozens
go.
of us. I love the reference there. Yeah, but it worked out, right? And one of the things I loved about Tyler Shuck is he hit that threshold, right? The Dak Prescott model, where, what, he got 7 games in, but I think he would have extrapolated out over 6 rushing touchdowns, 200, 250 rushing yards. That's what he's going to fit into my projection sheet next year. He's going to project out as a top 14, top 12 quarterback. And it sounds counterintuitive, right? But it's right there in front of us. So, that's something for me I've really leaned into because, we've seen it can be tough for the Anthony Richardsons of the world. Or look, even where Kyler Murray is now, when the offense has to be over adjusted for you, right? You have to over create those design runs or those passing windows, right? The luxury that Tyler Shuck gives a coach is valuable.
Yeah, man. I listen. I'm gonna say this. I think that kind of not necessarily landing spot, but your team environment is going to be everything, whether that's in
Yeah.
the pros or in college, right? And I think Shuck for how bad the Saints were as a team, he was sort of in a I got nothing to lose situation.
Yeah.
Like nobody's really believing in me anyways. The brand new coach, if we all suck, they're going to replace me. Like I just got to go out and play ball. And he was actually getting put out there in a good situation where Kellen Moore got to know his strengths. He got to understand Kellen Moore's offense, and he actually had his wide receivers be healthy for the first time. Like Chris Olave was out there finishing a season. So like there were a lot of things that went well for him. But there's often times where I'll look at that in college and I'm going to say, man, this team environment just totally changes the way I'm going to look at a player, whether that's the type of competition they go up against or, brother, I don't know how many times I've been like, okay, who's next on the list? Oh, great. A skill player from Tennessee. And I'm just like, all right, let's do the damn thing.
Yeah. A running back working through wide open lanes. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's evaluate this. How do you factor that in? Because you can't let it totally taint your view on a player, but now you're kind of like you're having to double project even. It's not just can they make it to the NFL and do they have the talent, but it's like can they also adjust to real systems when you're looking at a team like that?
This is one of the hardest things to do, right? It's really hard, and you have to really try to focus on really looking at the skill set of a player. I call it, you try your best to isolate them, right? Isolate them from the level of competition, isolate them from the scheme. It does help. I love college football. I love the NFL, but I love college football. And so, I do have a pretty good understanding of most of these schemes and the offense and the play calling and why a player is used in the way they are. But, take a really good example. I mentioned Ted Hurst earlier, Georgia State wide receiver. He was an FCS guy. He transfers up to Georgia State. Well, he gets one game against Vanderbilt, right? And he has great production. He goes 7 for 70, which for me, Georgia State versus Vanderbilt, that's awesome production, right? And so I'm watching that game, and this is him against SEC defenders, right? And so I'm looking for something that he does really well that could translate to the next level. I'm watching him. He has excellent release on in-breaking routes against a Vanderbilt corner. All right. I love when a wide receiver has a good release. I love when they can win with the first step, and especially when they can win over the middle of the field, right, on an in-breaking route. So for me, that gets me excited. And what that does is, that puts that player on my radar for me. The next step in this process, right, you want to watch this player through the Senior Bowl and the combine processes. And that's why those two sets of games or experiences are so important for me, right? So it could be Senior Bowl or Shrine Bowl, either one of these all-star games. What it's doing is it's pulling the player out of the context of their scheme, right?
Yep.
It's giving them the ability to win in one-on-one situations and isolation drills. And so that's why a guy from Georgia State could go from a 6th-round draft pick to a 3rd-round draft pick if he crushes it in Mobile, right, later this month. So And then of course, you have the combine, and you're going to see more of the athleticism versus the physical skill set when it comes to the combine. But that's why, I don't fully fade the combine. I keep put it into the context of their tape. Sometimes I'll go back and I'll adjust athleticism or speed scores if they do great at the combine, right? Because maybe I didn't have the full understanding of that player relative to the defense that I was watching them play in. A guy can look really quick against Sunbelt competition, and then turns out he's not fast at all. He's running a 4.640 at the wide receiver position or something along those lines. So, that's generally how I try to approach that. But it's one of the toughest parts of this process.
It really is. It really is. And I'm glad you mentioned something about the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl and how that it's gonna be fish out of water scenario. And you could typically see, like, I love to pay attention to who shows up on day one and just looks really good, because that means like they are making an impact in a situation that is very uncomfortable. All new players, all new situation. You're getting interviews left and right, and you still have the wherewithal to show up and just go play. Like, I love doing that. I'm a first and last guy. I'd love to see who was great on day one and who improved throughout the process and just got better and better and better over the 3 or 4 days they practice. So those are always things I love to see, and it gives those games more value than I think people want to admit. I mean, how many times have we looked at the players everyone was talking about out of the Senior Bowl and we go, oh, they ended up being really good? Or even Shrine Bowl, MVP of the East-West Shrine game, Corey Krosky Merritt. And everyone's like, oh, this Bill character came out of nowhere. Nah, dog, we were in these streets back in the winter time. Like, what are we talking about? So I'm glad you put some respect on those events. There's a lot of places though that a new evaluator can trip up, whether that's putting too much stock into something like these all-star games or a combine or film or analytics or whatever. There's a lot of places where we can just make errors, and errors are going to happen. But where do you see new evaluators making their biggest mistakes every single time?
I think one area in particular that I see that folks generally overestimate, at least, again, relative to my process, and we talked about route running earlier. I think route running is really important. I think one thing that gets folks tripped up is seeing a full route tree from a wide receiver. I think it's awesome. If a wide receiver can run the full tree well, fantastic. Absolutely love it. But what I have learned over the years is, depending on that player's profile and skill set, they might only need to run 3 routes well, right? Or the scheme, the college scheme they're in, might not have asked them to run those routes. So, right. A really good example, talking about Senior Bowl players to watch, Reggie Virgil, the wide receiver out of Texas Tech. I put him in the sleeper category still for now. At Texas Tech, they only asked him to run the bottom of the route tree. He ran it very well, separates consistently, good footwork, releases well when he's up against press coverage. So he's a good route runner for what he's asked to do. He started off at Bowling Green, right? So he started off in the MAC. When he was there, he was only working the deep field. I think he had a 17.5 yards per reception, right? So in that scheme, they just wanted to throw the ball deep to him, and he was working well downfield. Texas Tech, they didn't need that. They had Caleb Douglas, another Senior Bowl guy who's a bit more of a field stretcher, right? So I think if you're thinking about one particular trait, route running can be really tricky, and I think folks can overestimate it. Look for the skills themselves. The release, that's a big piece. The explosiveness through the routes. Do they consistently have, a step and a half or 2 steps on a college defender? Those are things I think are a little stickier when you're talking about how well are they going to be able to separate at the next level.
That's awesome. I love this. This has been such a good experience. I think not only just for the audience, whoever's watching or listening, but I'm loving this, man. Like I keep saying, the dirty little secret of this show is that I know things already, but I'm learning from every single person that comes on. And it feels a little self-serving and selfish that I'm like, cool, I'm learning from everyone and taking in all these little pieces and playing it off as the audience is getting some value. But genuinely, it's been great to just kind of talk process and understand like what you're looking for and what, or sometimes what not to look for, but this is the part of the show at the end where what I do is I give the guest a chance to get a little creative and be able to ask their own questions. And what I do is I pass on the questions. So our last guest that we had was Matt Waldman, who, I mean, anyone who knows the draft is familiar with Matt Waldman and his 4,000 page draft guide and the amount of just love and passion he puts into that. He was my last guest, and he wanted me to ask, what position did you want to play as a pro football player when you were a little kid? And I guess the second part would be, who did you hope to be? Who did you look up to and say, I want to be that guy when I grow up?
I love that question. It's good just to get a question from Matt Waldman. So I would say, I always wanted to be a tight end. So I played just a little bit of high school football, and I was, interior lineman. I played offense and defense, and I just wasn't quite in shape in the way that I think I should have been at the high school level. So I got stuck, inside the tackles. But man, playing on the line, you just want to be the tight end. You want to be able to still hit somebody in the mouth, right? But two or three catches a game, get a little bit of that glory. So that's always what I wanted to, and I think maybe the reason I didn't follow football as a player was really just not having the athleticism to be able to compete at the high school level, certainly at least at that point in my physical development. So I grew up a Giants fan. I now claim the Ravens. I lived in Baltimore for 6 years. I love Baltimore fans, Orioles, Ravens. It's such an awesome city, but I did grow up a Giants fan. So I think, the tight end, right, is Jeremy Shockey. I remember having the red and white Jeremy Shockey jersey. That was,
hell yeah.
And just like, what a chaotic player, but such ahead of his time, right, in a lot of ways in terms of what he was doing at the tight end position.
Dude, I'm Miami born and raised.
Oh, there you go. That's right.
I grew up watching Jeremy Shockey, Ken Dorsey, Willis McGahee, Clinton Portis, that whole team, man. Santana, Moss, Andre John. God, that team was so good. Those players were so good. And it made me kind of annoyed because I was like, damn, how can the college team in Miami be so good and dominate so easily? And then you turn on the Dolphins and you're like, this is bad football. This is just not enjoyable for anybody. Nobody is liking this. All right, Matt, your question for the next guest. It does not have to be football related, by the way. I've had questions from how do you cook your steak to what's better, Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. So any question that comes to your mind here, something that maybe fits your brand and who you are, but can maybe transcend to the next person.
Oh man, that's good. I had thought of a football question. I did just finish the full audiobook series for Lord of the Rings, so that's top of mind. I would definitely pick Lord of the Rings over Harry Potter for that one.
Every time.
I think in terms of, things that I love in my life, college football and watching film is one of them. But the other thing is I love coffee way too much. So I would say the question for the next guest is, what is the perfect cup of coffee or caffeinated beverage or, anything along those lines? Because I'm always supporting my local shops, looking for new sets of beans, trying to perfect that art a little bit. So I guess, you got your coffee grinds, grinding the tape. There's a joke in there somewhere.
There we go. I'm with you here. I'm with grinder. Oh, that's the different thing.
Oh,
never mind. I was going to say, open yourself up a coffee shop, call it Grinders. And then that did not work.
That's marketing. It'll get your attention.
It's, you know what? There's going to be a clientele base for it. Your door will be open. Well, sir, this was fun. This was a good time, man. We got to talk a little ball, talk a little bit about these prospects. It was great to catch up with you. Like, this was just so, and honestly, it's like when someone is out of your view for a little bit, like you almost forget how good they are at what they do, man. So this was a pleasure to just hear from you again, see how well you're doing, and just, get back into that conversation mode with you. what I'd love for you to do, if you could take a second here, just let everybody know what you're working on, where they can find you, and all that stuff.
Yeah, so I've talked about the Rookie Big Board a lot. So that's my product. I'm over at patreon.com/rookie big board. But if you just want to check out a little bit more before, oh, this guy's pitching me on Patreon, right? We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of that. We're actually at this point a daily podcast. We're pretty much putting out content every day, 2 or 3 videos a week. We are in Senior Bowl preview season, so we have a video breaking down every position group for the Senior Bowl, and that will lead into our rookie profile series. So we do full profiles. We pack it into 15 minutes, film evaluation, stat breakdown on, we try to do 25 to 35 rookies a year, kind of the top players. And then certainly, after the draft, updating based on landing spot. But over at patreon.com/rookie big board, you can see the full rankings. Like I said, I give access to my full scouting notebook. So everything we talked about, trait by trait breakdown, it's actually available for every prospect I've watched. I'm at 57 players as of today, and I've got actually 4 or 5 more guys I've got to watch today, so I'll be over 60 by the time you're listening to this. Rookie Big Board Discord, I do one-on-one draft consultation calls, so a lot of good stuff over there. We try to keep it accessible, and we've built a really awesome, fun community there in our Discord and everything too, so that's probably the best part of this whole process.
I got to talk to you a little bit about that, because I want to start doing a Discord for Pretend GM and sort of open things up here a little bit, man. We're going to talk more about that. But,
I like it.
Dude, thanks for coming on. This has been awesome. I know everyone else enjoyed it. For everyone that has watched or listened all the way through, I can't thank you enough. And if you're listening over on Apple, Spotify, take a second to leave a 5-star review. This matters so much for a new podcast like myself, independent, going out. This is big. If you're watching on YouTube, take a second to like this video, comment down below. And I once again can't thank everybody enough. For myself, for Matt, I'll see you next time. Adios.